Welcome back, everybody, to Two Ball, Two Bold, episode 15. We're still doing our overs and unders for the NFL upcoming season. I'm Marshawn Parker.
And I'm Nathan Tomlin, and today we're going to do the North Divisions, both of the conference championship losers. So, final four teams that didn't make it to the Super Bowl were from the AFC and NFC North, respectively. So, we'll kind of stick with that. So, again, just to kind of rehash, we're doing over under. It's based on the opening line over under. They may have changed slightly since then. And then we're going to pick at least one. Some teams may have two games to watch that we're looking forward to. And then the player on the team that's most likely to win an award. So only major awards: MVP, Offensive Defensive Player of the Year, Offensive Defensive Rookie of the Year, Comeback Player of the Year, and Coach of the Year. So not like all pros and just rushing titles, receiving titles, things like that. Some teams obviously are going to be kind of a stretch because they're not really going to have somebody. It's only 8 awards up for grabs, so obviously most teams don't win one. So we'll start with the AFC North, and so their schedule is, again, they play each team in their own division twice. That's their 6 games. They play every team in the AFC West. That'd be Kansas City, Las Vegas, Denver, and LA Chargers. They play all the teams in the NFC East. That'd be Dallas, Philadelphia, Washington, and the Giants. And then they play every team that was in equal standing in their division in the AFC. And then that 17th game is the team that was at the equal division standing of the NFC South. So they do get the weakest division there. In my opinion, from top to bottom, weakest division. So we'll start again based on last year's standings. Baltimore was division winner last year.
Mm-hmm.
Their strength of schedule is second in the league at 536. Now, part of this is because, of course, the AFC North was very good. Two teams made the playoffs, and Pittsburgh also finished above 500. But Baltimore's strength of schedule second, 536 winning percentage. NFC East was also good as well last year, sending 2 teams to the playoffs, both with over 11 wins, which again does help their strength of schedule. Their over-under is 10.5 wins. I went over at 12-5 for the Ravens. I feel like the Ravens got better. Last year, they still won the number 1 seed despite the fact they had top at least 2, maybe it was 3 running backs on IR.
Mm-hmm.
Their best receiver was a rookie. Their Lamar Jackson's favorite target, Mark Andrews, was injured, missed quite a few games as well. But they had the number 1 defense in the league. They're returning a lot. They did lose Patrick Queen, but for that money, they probably felt that they couldn't really bring him back, but they did bring back, and I'm going to butcher his name, Matabuke, however you say his name, on the defensive line, who had a coming out year for them last year. But yeah, I do think their division overall is actually going to take a step back. I think the only team that's going to be better is the Bengals, and that's just because, addition by addition, Joe Burrow's healthy right now, so if he stays healthy, I think they'll be better. I don't think Pittsburgh got better, and Cleveland, I don't think necessarily got better, and a lot of that just hinges on Deshaun. What is Deshaun Watson? At this point, it's been a few years since he's been a playmaker. It's been a few years since he's been even an average quarterback, let alone a good quarterback. So Baltimore, I do have the over. I do think they're going to go about 12-5. They have 2 games to watch for me. One is week 1 at Kansas City. Kind of a redemption game. Obviously, they hosted the AFC Championship game last year, and they lost. And it was a very close game. The defense actually played pretty well. Um, and the big storyline was not the lack of rushing yards, but the lack of rushing attempts by Baltimore. So what did they do? They go out and get the best running back in terms of running the ball over the past 6-7 years, and Derrick Henry. Sure, he's on the downside of his career. He's 30, which, as we all know, 30 is kind of uh, a dead marker for running backs. It's kind of where running backs go to die once they hit 30. Very few succeed beyond that. But Derrick Henry's one I think will. And I think he's going to be a great complement to this offense because of his power running ability. Um, he's a different type of runner than they've had before, and he's the best running back that Lamar Jackson's ever played with. But week 1 against Kansas City, they're going to run the ball. Derrick Henry's going to get at least 20 carries in that game. I wouldn't be surprised if he got a few more. Maybe since week 1, they may give more to more running back by committee type of runs, but they're going to run the ball more. Week 1s are always interesting. It's a Thursday night game. You're kind of finding your footing, but it can kind of set the tone for the whole year. Not to mention, it's going to be fun to watch, right? They're two of the best teams in the NFL, 2 of maybe 5 teams in the AFC that realistically have a chance to win the Super Bowl. And so I think it's going to be a good game. The other one I have is Week 17 at Houston, and that's actually on Christmas Day. So it's a nationally televised game on Christmas Day. Again, 2 good teams, and depending on obviously how the season shakes out, that's the second to last game of the year. There's playoff seeding that could take place. Both of them are favored to win their divisions in the AFC. So if that were to happen, that game can be huge for seeding purposes and where they get seeded. Player to win the award, there's 2. I picked 2. Lamar Jackson MVP, although I don't think he will. It'd be very difficult to win again. Last year, I think he won because there was no other quarterback that really had an absolutely stellar year. I think he did have the best year of all the quarterbacks. And then considering the lack of talent at skill positions around him, I think did elevate his MVP case. I don't think he gets it this year, but he's one. The other one is Derrick Henry for Offensive Player of the Year. I think he's going to get, if he stays healthy, he's going to get anywhere between 12 and 20 rushing touchdowns. I would not be surprised if he got 20 touchdowns. Now, the yards, I don't know if he'll get. But look at the Ravens historically since Lamar Jackson's been there, right? If you're a fantasy player, Lamar Jackson gets all these rushing yards, get you down to the 2-yard line, and then they hand the ball off to Gus Edwards and these other guys that run the ball in. And it's frustrating because it's you do all the yards. But now that guy's Derrick Henry, who's as good of a goal line rusher as there's been. So those are my players who win the awards on the Ravens. And again, I'm going the over.
I agree with you on that. I picked the over as well. I have him at 11 wins, just because I do think that division is going to be tougher than it was last year, and we'll get to some of the reasons why when we talk about some of the other teams. But I think they have at least 11 wins in them. The game of the year for me is actually, I believe it's week, let's see, 18, 17, 16. I think it's week 13, November 25th against the Chargers. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I do think the Chargers are going to be a lot better. As we stated in the last video, I think they're going to be a lot better than people, be going into the season. I think people will be interested to see, you have the automatic battle of quarterbacks, right? Lamar Jackson versus Justin Herbert. You also have the Harbaugh brothers. So there's a lot there. The storylines are there from an entertainment standpoint, and then just strictly from a football standpoint, I think it's going to be a really good game. I'm interested to see a very specific matchup, which is probably right now my favorite non-49er is Kyle Hamilton. I think he's literally the prototype of what you would want if you built a safety right now. He's six
That's
four,
big.
about 220, 225. He's rangy. His 40 time I think was like a 4.46, but he plays way faster. Like he's the example of like you don't really judge a 40 time because he plays like he runs like a 4.4. And great blitzer. You can put him in a box. He's rangy enough that he can be a true free safety, strong safety. He can do everything. He can even play a little bit of a slot corner. You can put him in a dime linebacker. He is amazing. And for the awards, sticking with Kyle Hamilton, I think if he has a type of year that I think he's capable of, I think he can get a lot of play for Defensive Player of the Year because he's going to be able to make a lot of splash plays. He's going to have interceptions. He's going to have sacks. He's going to have the forced fumbles, tackles for loss. He's going to have every. He's going to fill up the box sheet. So the box scores rather. So the stat sheet is going to be filled up by him enough where he's going to have all these different splash plays, and just the way he plays in general is enough that he's going to start garnering. And then that game that I picked as the game of the year for them, that's going to be a prime time game if he shines in that game. And let's just say he picks off her one or two times and has a sack or a forced fumble, something along those lines. I think it'll really start boosting up his potential defensive player of the year resume. They're not giving Lamar Jackson another MVP again. He's not going to get another MVP unless he wins the Super Bowl. It's that simple. Uh, I just don't see he could have a better season this year than he did last season, and he's still not going to win MVP. He's not going to. Again, he's just not going to get another MVP until he's either in a Super Bowl or wins the Super Bowl. Derrick Henry, I think, is going to have a really good year, but I think they're going to want to, at some point, limit his carries to keep him fresh for the playoffs. So I
Preserve
don't
him.
think,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I could see him. I could see them trying to be creative and making sure he doesn't have a heavy workload the full
Mhm.
season, even though I think the touchdowns will be there, like you discussed before. Um, but yeah, I would say 11 wins. Best chance of award for them would be Kyle Hamilton. And, hey, the Harbaugh Bowl. That's going to be the game of the year for me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it helps that Baltimore's going to have one of the top defenses in the league too. So defense
Yes.
players of the year typically do come from, one of the top defenses. That usually helps.
Mm-hmm.
So the next team, which was second last year, is Cleveland. And this is part of the reason why I did pick the division to kind of take a step back a little bit. Cleveland has the hardest strength of schedule at 547. Their over under is 8.5. I have them going under. I have them going 7-10. I do not trust Deshaun Watson. I don't trust him to be on the field. I don't trust him
Mm-hmm.
when he's on the field.
Mm-hmm.
If he can be 70% of what he was on Houston, they will hit the over. Their defense is that good. They added Jerry Jeudy, who was very disappointing in Denver, but coming to Cleveland is going to be the second receiver, which you can make the argument he was the second in Denver too with Cortland Sutton, although Sutton missed a lot of time with injuries and stuff too. So they gave him a contract, so obviously they feel like he can be that guy. Nick Chubb's going to be back. Now he came back from torn ACL before in college. Part of the reason why he went in the second round is because of his injury history and the workload he had at University of Georgia. He is off to one of the greatest starts in the history of football for a running back. He missed 1,000 yards his rookie year by like 8 yards, and they really didn't start playing him until about week 6 or 7. If he would have had 1,000 yards, he would have had 1,000 yards every year except last year, which would have been the first 5 years of his career, at over 5 yards a clip in every single season. He is
That's
right
impressive.
now. He is second all time in rushing yards. Rushing yards per carry among running backs. So take away quarterbacks behind Jamal Charles.
Jamal Charles.
Very different type of runner than Jamal Charles too. Right.
Yes.
Jamal Charles had a lot more big runs. Nick Chubb runs up the middle. Nick Chubb runs between the tackles. I love Nick Chubb, man. I mean, but we got to see how he comes back, and they're going to be careful with him coming back, right? They had just given him that big contract extension, which is the one you get as a running back. But listen, they're stuck with Deshaun Watson. And so Cleveland is in a very difficult position. They cannot cut him realistically until 2027. His 2024 cap hit, which it's this year, right? So obviously they weren't going to do it. His cap hit, if they were to cut him, would be 156 million dead money. Next year, it's 110 million. The year after that, it's 64. In 2027, I think it's like 20, which is doable.
Yeah.
So he's their quarterback for the next 3 years. I don't trust him. And now they don't have Flacco back there to save them. Their defense is going to be good. Their running game, if Nick Chubb is healthy and can stay healthy, is going to be good. They have a pretty solid offensive line. But I don't trust Deshaun Watson. And again, they have the hardest schedule in the league, right? So you look at the teams that they play, you know, that the second team that was in these divisions, I mean, they do get the Raiders. And then, I'm sorry, they play the whole AFC West. So they do get the Jaguars. They get the Dolphins. Are the two other AFC teams they play. The Jaguars, I mean, that's kind of a toss-up. But I think the Dolphins are probably better. So I really don't see them hitting the over. The game to watch for me are it's week 7 and 8. It's right in the middle of the season. They're home games, back-to-back home games against Cincinnati and Baltimore, who I think are the two favorites to win the division. Those are the important games because they have to at least split those. But really, when you look at your schedule in the NFL and you mark off the games that you have to win, you're not going to win every game at home, but in your division, you got to win the 3 home games. And you got to try and win 1 road game because you got to go 4-2 in your division. If you don't, it's going to be very difficult. With that being said, those are the most important games because they're probably going to be 3-4 or 4-3 going into those games. I'm sorry, 4-2 or 3-3 going into those 2 games. So those games are the most important ones. They're division games, they're home games. They got to win at least one, probably both, if they realistically want a chance to win the division. And then the player to win the award, there's 2 guys. There's Garrett for Defensive Player of the Year. He just won one. It's very difficult to win 2 in a row. He would have to do better than he did last year, and then have a greater distance between him and the rest of the field to win it again. Mm-hmm. The other guy, and this guy's more likely, I think, would be Nick Chubb for Comeback Player of the Year. Right?
Yeah.
If he comes back and he's healthy, he's going to get 1,400 yards. He's going to get 10-plus touchdowns after playing 2 games last year. So that one's probably more likely, but those 2 guys would be the 2 guys that could win an award for the Browns.
What was their over and under was 8.5, right?
8.5. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
they have a hard schedule in the league.
Yeah. And I really believe in their defense. This one is difficult for me because, and it's so funny. Watson was so good. I mean, once we found out he was nasty, man, he just decided he didn't want to play football anymore. And I tell you, you know, I wish ill will for any player. I don't wish him to be hurt or any of these things. I am a Jameis Winston truther. I'm still a believer. And I really believe if Jameis Winston ends up getting in, I think they could win 10 games.
He's not a good quarterback for that team. He
I
turns the ball over too much. It's better to
well,
have a game manager with that team than an
you
explosive quarterback.
you're judging him off of play from 6 years ago, 5 years ago.
Even on the Saints,
Um,
dude, he was not good on the Saints. Don't sit there and tell
I
me that he was good on the
I
Saints.
think I listen. I can see him. First of all, I think Amari Cooper he might be the most underrated player in the league.
He's a
Uh,
stud.
he is nasty. He is so good. If a young receiver wanted to see what your route should look like,
Mhm.
watch Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper's routes is so precise. And I'm still a believer in. Look, I was pounding the table, and I was hoping and praying the Niners would draft Jared Judy. I thought he was going to be the next. Honestly, well, it's ironic because I thought he was going to be the next Amari Cooper. So it's ironic that they're both playing
Very
together
different
now.
body type, though.
Well, but both Alabama receivers, both different body. Amari Cooper's a little like thicker framed, but
Judy's more of a twitch.
precise routes, precise in routes, good hands. At least I mean, that's what it looked like coming out of Alabama.
Yeah,
And
Judy does not have good hands anymore. I don't know what happened, but
yeah, in
the thin
college he
air
caught
in
everything.
Denver, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe he caught everything in college, and I thought he was going to be along those lines, but um, they're going to probably end up winning 8 games. They're going to win 8 games, and and I tell you, it's that defense is so good. That defense is so good. Their defense is good. They have a good line. I think Chubb is going to come back strong. I mean, we just saw a video of him squatting like 580 last week, which is that's just crazy. That's absolutely crazy. But tore his knee up, and now he's back to squatting 580. And that probably wasn't even his max. I like the receivers. I like the tight ends. But they're going to probably win 8 games. They're going to win 8 games, and I hope he rebounds, but it just looks like Watson is never going to be that guy again. He's just not. It doesn't.
And
It doesn't appear that
they're not playing Jameis unless Watson's hurt or
that's
decides not to show up to a game like he
because
did. They're paying him too much money.
you're paying him too much money, and you have to. This is where the politics of sports come in. When people act like it's a meritocracy, it's not. It's a situation where if the coaching staff said, "Hey, we think Winston gives us a better chance," the owners would say, "Why isn't the guy that we're paying, a guaranteed contract to? Why is he not in the game?" And so the politics of it all, they would never allow for it. They're going to probably win 8 games. The defense, which is going to be, tragic because the defense is going to play their heart out. Greatest award are the same two people that you said. I mean, Nick Chubb has a great chance of being comeback player of the year. He's not going to win it because they're not going to have the record. And I can tell you who I believe is going to win it, and that'll come up later. And then Myles Garrett, they would have to win 10 or 11 games for him to win it, unless he had like 26 sacks or something like that, which he's not going to have. But the game of the game of the year that I set for them is I actually had. I mean, it's interesting because if you look at the last stretch, their last 5 games is they have Steelers, Chiefs, Bengals, Dolphins, Ravens. And so, which is why, because of that, I said the December 8th game against the Steelers is pretty much going to
They have
that's
to win
going
it
to they have to win it because that's going to make or break the season at that point. They
because they're
lose that
losing at
game.
least 2 of those last 4.
They lose that game, they're probably going to end the season 0-5. So that will be the game that is the one. If there's actually Brown fans out there, December 8th against the Steelers.
Yeah.
And who knows, that actually might be the make or break game for both teams. But talk about that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then so the next team is Pittsburgh,
Hmm.
and their strength of schedule is third at 533. So we've had the first, second, and third strength of schedules here. Think about this. They're third in their division. They have the third hardest schedule in the league. Um, Obviously, for them, big change is quarterback.
Yeah.
And a lot of what you think of Russell Wilson and how he's going to perform is going to guide you in terms of over under. But their over under is also 8.5. Um, so literally the over under, if all four teams in the AFC North hit over, all of them were over 500. That's very unlikely to
Yeah.
happen. But
No.
especially with the schedule, like I said, that they have. But the over under is 8.5. I believe it or not, I picked the over at 9-8. They were 9-8 last year. I think they go 9-8 again. I don't think they get in the playoffs. They got better. I think Russell Wilson's better than Kenny Pickett.
Hmm.
I loved their draft. Their first two draft picks were interior offensive line. Shore up the interior offensive line. Their third round pick was an inside linebacker, and of course they run a 3-4 to pair that inside linebacker with Patrick Queen, who they give a big contract to. I
Hmm.
think they overpaid him because I think he's overrated, but he is better than what they had. So they still got the defense still got better. Um, they got an additional wide receiver late. Um, I think Russell Wilson can put the ball in better places for Pickens than Pickett could, which will allow George Pickens. I don't know how great of a route runner George Pickens is, but look, throw the ball up on a 50-50 ball, and with Pickens, it's more like a 90-10. He makes some incredible catches.
Yes.
Um, they do start, and part of the reason I also picked them to go over is they could start the season 4-0. Their first four games are at Atlanta, which is Kirk Cousins. Is Kirk Cousins going to play that game? Even if he does, it's his first game back after almost a year off in a new offense, new system, all that. And again, Pittsburgh's defense is very good. Then the next one is a for sure win. It's at Denver. Then they get the Chargers, but it is at home. And again, the Chargers going across the country. Those west to east games are always difficult for the West Coast teams. And so if the teams are even close to fairly matched, you got to go with the home team. And I think Pittsburgh's defense is good. And the Chargers are still going to be getting into that system. Right. They're still going to be, it's only going to be the third game. How much is Herbert really going to play in the preseason? It's only going to be the third game, especially coming off an injury. It's only going to be the third game of the season. And then the fourth game is at Indy, which is a winnable game. So they could potentially start season 4. They could also start season 2-2 or 1-3.
They
But
might start the season 5-2.
yeah. And so I have them, because I actually have, they could finish as good as 7-2 because after Indy, they have at Las Vegas. They host
Hmm.
the garbage Giants, and then they're at Washington. So really, their first 7 games are extremely winnable. And then
Yes.
after that, then they have home games against Dallas and the Jets. And if Rodgers is playing, that's 2 very difficult games, even though they're at home. But the first 7 games are winnable. I mean, they should at worst be 5-2.
Yeah.
They should be better than that probably, but at worst they should be 5-2, which puts them in a good position to hit the over. But the game to watch, there's 2, and the reason there's 2 is one is at Denver because Russell Wilson going into Denver. You mentioned it with the Broncos. It's a big game, right? Russell Wilson, I think, is going to ball out. Obviously he did practice a little bit against that defense. I don't think he's throwing the ball at Surtain. I think he's keeping it to the other side of the field,
Hmm.
which would be smart. But the Broncos are not very good, and that defense is going to eat up whoever they put out there at quarterback. The other game is Week 11 in Baltimore, and it's to what I said. Their first 9 games, they could be as good as 7-2 going into week 11 at home against Baltimore. That could be a game where both teams have very similar records. And again, it's a home game in the division. That is probably, in terms of importance, a more important game.
Mm-hmm.
And will probably be a closer game too. And then the player to win the award is TJ Watt. I mean, we talked
Yeah.
about him in the Hall of Fame episode. 4 out of 6 full seasons that he's played, he's been a top 3 defensive player of the year vote, or 4 out of 5. I'm sorry, of the full seasons he's played other than his rookie year, he's been top 3. So they're going to have one of the best defenses in the league, and he's one of the best defensive players. So if he stays healthy, it's him. So that's Pittsburgh.
I have them at 9 wins as well.
Okay, so you have the over too.
Yeah, they're going to go over. I think that I think the offense is going to look better. I just can't see Tomlin having a losing record. I did the Steelers, even
Great
if they're
last
not a
name,
great
too.
team.
Last name of winners, bro.
He's your distant cousin, right? And
I wish.
and this is the thing, though. I'll say this, and this is why this is the game of, the game to watch for me with them is week 7 against the Jets. If they win that game, I think they win 10 games. Because I think they're going to beat the Cowboys. I think they're going to be. I think this is going to be a weird season for Dallas. And I don't want to get too much in that because then I'll be stepping on some things we're going to talk about in another episode. If they are able to beat the Jets on October 20th, then they get their 10th win, and then we're talking playoffs now. I don't know.
And that's an
that
important
they're
game
gonna be able to
too,
do that, but
because the Jets are an AFC team as well,
Yeah,
and are more than
correct.
likely going to be in the mix again if Rodgers is healthy for a
Yeah.
wild card spot. So that's a huge tiebreaker game.
But it's
Yeah.
funny because everybody's going to go into that game looking at Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, but that's
The defenses.
those defenses are nasty.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a
it's going to
defensive
be
game.
that is going to be a hard hitting game. That's the type of game I like to watch. I want to see some people. I want to see some people running around, see ball, get ball type of game, right?
Mhm.
That is going to be a really good game. Now, in terms of awards, I think I mean, there's nobody else to pick besides TJ. I mean, I guess you could say I was going to try to be different and say maybe Mika
Minka.
Fitzpatrick, but no, it's TJ Watt he's probably, as long as he stays healthy. I don't know what it is. The Watts, they all look like superhumans, but break down a little bit. As long as TJ Watt is healthy, you can pin him. You can forget pencil. You can write it in pen. In 18 games, yeah, I think you can write. You can write it in pen. I think you can write down in pen 20 sacks as long as he stays healthy. So he would be the best chance. I mean, I guess if you want to be, you could potentially say Russell Wilson comeback player of the year.
No, he can't be comeback, man. He only missed a couple of games, and because he was benched, that's not comeback player. Yeah, comeback players usually have to play less than half the season.
Yeah. So I guess TJ Watt would be the only opportunity for awards for them, but they're going to be an intriguing team because there is a lot of, how I feel about George Pickens. I think George Pickens is amazing. I told you I used to go to those UGA games, and I used to tell people, man, George Pickens, I don't know why people don't have him as a potential first rounder. And then I
because
remember
Georgia just doesn't play that way. You
well,
know what I mean?
no,
they don't throw the ball enough, and he missed a lot of games.
What it was is that I was going to the game, so I seen he was wide open, and then I would throw the ball 10 yards beyond him. So, instead of it being a 56-yard touchdown, it was an incompletion. George Pickens he's a baller. He is an absolute baller. I think Najee is a baller. But we got to see what happens with their season. Was Russell Wilson going to play the whole year? Is Fields going to end up getting in? I mean, what's going to happen? We know the defense is going to be. They're going to do what they do. Steelers
Mhm.
defense is always going to be stout, and they grow star linebackers on trees in Pittsburgh. I don't know if they. I mean, they haven't had one like T.J. Watt in quite a long time, but nonetheless. So yeah.
There haven't been many players in the NFL that have been like DJ Watt, though.
No, yeah,
Um,
it's well. So let me ask you, who's the better Watt brother?
oh God, that's tough because they're different. You would probably take JJ because of where he plays and the difference between him and other interior defensive linemen is there's a bigger gap.
Yeah,
You could get something closer to TJ Watt on the edge
yeah,
easier than something that would resemble JJ Watt on the interior line. So I
and
would
that's
say
that's
JJ
my
Watt
thought.
because of that. That doesn't mean he's necessarily better. He's just at a position that doesn't have the depth like that. Like there's a lot of edge rushers, and TJ Watt is the best of them, I think. You know, at right now,
Yeah,
but JJ Watt played a position that again he was a defensive end, but in a 3-4.
yeah.
So he was on the more on the interior, not on the outside. So it was a little different.
Well, and
Um,
he had a 3-year stretch where I think the only people who matches or tops of that 3-year stretch he had was LT, Reggie White, and Aaron Donald.
Aaron Donald. Mhm.
I would say those are all that they're
I think it was a
not
4-year
to.
stretch. He won three out of 4 years. He won
You're right.
Defensive Player of the
It
Year.
was a 4-year stretch, but that stretch of time, I would say those are the only defenders who either matched or superseded that. Other than that, I mean, yeah. So that's why I would say J.J. Watt. But yeah.
Okay. So the last team in the AFC North is the Bengals, who finished last. Of course, they got off to a slow start, and then Burrow got hurt to pour some salt on the wound. So their strength of schedule, we deviate a little bit from the top strength schedule to in the middle of the pack. They're tied for 16th at a 502. Their over-under is 10.5. So them and Baltimore both at 10.5, and Cleveland and Pittsburgh with 8.5. I'm taking the over at 11-6. Part of it is because of the strength of schedule. Again, they're playing bottom feeder in the NFC South. That's Carolina. That's a game where I think even if Joe Burrow doesn't play, they could probably still win. I think Carolina's pretty bad, man. The other, and then from the AFC East, they get the last place team, which is New England. So they get New England and Carolina. The rest of their division doesn't. That's two basically extra bye weeks. You play arguably the two worst teams in the league, and then they play the AFC West, and I think the Broncos. I think those are the three worst teams in the league in terms of roster talent, and you get to play all three of them. So to me, the Bengals are starting out with 3. So that means they would just have to go 8-6 to hit the over. They could start 5-1 because this is the beginning of their schedule. You ready for this? They get New England at home. Good. Joe Burrow can ease his way back in. At Kansas City and New England now with we'll get into them in another episode, but Barmore, hopefully he's okay. But having I think it was blood clots, and he was their defensive interior stud, and now you take him out, and then you don't know what's happened with Judon. The Patriots are falling apart, and they were not good anyway. But they're good at New England first, then at Kansas City, which is a tough one. Then home against Washington, at Carolina, versus Baltimore, but it is at home, and then at the New York Giants. So really the only 2 games that they could conceivably lose in that is at Kansas City and versus Baltimore. But I think Cincinnati wins at home against Baltimore. I think they lose in Baltimore later in the year. I think they split, which would put them at 5-1 to start the season. And then they end the season, the last 4 games, is at Tennessee, right? Because they play the last place team from the AFC South, who Tennessee's pretty bad, versus Cleveland, but at home. They get the Broncos at home. And then they finish the season at Pitt, which at that point, if Pittsburgh is not in the playoff mix, Justin Fields is playing that game.
Yeah.
if Joe Burrow plays 16 plus games, he's played 4 years in the league. The 2 seasons he's played 16 or more. He played 16 once, 17 once. They've made the Super Bowl and they've made the AFC Championship. So if Joe Burrow is healthy, they will be good. The game to watch is Week 5 at Baltimore. It's the home game against the Ravens. You pick either one of them, but that one's big because, again, that is going to put them – they'll probably be 3-1. I think they lose at Kansas City in Week 2. They beat Kansas City once, and now it's just in their head. They just can't get over that hump. They're like – it's almost like Buffalo, except they do have the one win. But ever since their mayor talked smack, it hasn't been the same.
No.
Kansas City still holds that. They put that on the bulletin every time they play Cincinnati. So I think Kansas City wins that. But they'll be 3-1 going to that game. Baltimore very well will have probably a similar record to that. And it's at home. They have to win that game, I think, if they want to win the division. That's almost a must-win game, as much of a must-win game as you can have in Week 5 and be 3-1, right? And the player to win the award is Joe Burrow, as possible two, right? Different awards, comeback player of the year as well as MVP.
I've got them under.
So you think he's getting hurt?
No. So I have them at 10 wins, and I think that the disease of more is going to kick in a little bit with them, and I think that's going to impact them a little bit in terms of being able to get, say, 11 or 12 wins. They've got receivers who's trying to get paid, and at some point the realization is going to come that they're not going to pay both of them. They're not paying T. They're not paying Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase is getting paid. It's just a matter of when.
It's next offseason.
In a matter of how much. So, but I think, and T. Higgins, I thought maybe they would trade T. Higgins in the offseason. And as good as he is, that might have been the best thing to do. At this point, we just haven't seen anything. Huh?
You know why they didn't?
Why?
Because they think they can win a Super Bowl. That's why they did it.
I know that's why they did it. But we haven't seen any proof that a receiver can go into the season contract year and produce. Maybe some of these other positions, and we're probably going to end up seeing a quarterback that we'll talk about in a later episode going to a year in the contract year. This will actually be his second time doing it, but I think that's going to have impact. I really do. And I look at for them Week 8 against Philly. That's going to tell a lot. If they're able to beat Philadelphia, then I'll probably end up being wrong, because I do think that's going to be a really good game. Saquon Barkley to me is the second or third best running back in the league.
Talent-wise.
Yeah, and I think he's to be a monster this year, and I think we're all going to be like, oh yeah, we forgot that he's really, really good, and he was unfortunately stuck on the Giants.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's going to be a really big game. I think that the Bengals are what I've said, countless times over, is that I think that they're a bad organization that just happened to draft 2 blue chippers. And I think that this is where we kind of start to see that Joey Burr has to overcome a lot by being a Bengal.
Mm-hmm.
Proved to be a good organization. And they've actually proved to be the opposite of a good organization. And, we need to give Joe Burrow his flowers, because he has to overcome a lot being a Bengal. And I think Jamar Chase has to overcome a lot being a Bengal. They're just awesome. So, yeah, I mean, obviously the awards is just like you said. I don't think there's any chance he gets MVP, because I don't think they're going to be good enough. But I definitely think he can get comeback player of the year.
Yeah. So, and again, the big reason why I went over, I think their over-under is high. I do think it's high, but I think it's
Yeah,
high because of their schedule. Because again, New England, Washington, Carolina, the Giants,
yeah,
Tennessee, and Denver. That's 6 games.
yeah,
Now,
yeah,
if Joe Burrow, of course, this all hinges on Burrow being healthy. That's 6
yeah.
games they win. That means they can go 5-6 in the other games. And I
Mhm.
think Joe Burrow's good enough to where even if you don't feel like Cincinnati's a better team, I feel like he is good enough to
Yeah.
overcome that and win a couple of those games and get those wins for you. That to me was the big thing. Their schedule to me it helps them. Otherwise, yeah, I think Baltimore's the better team in the division.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
Baltimore wins the division inevitably. Um, but it will be interesting as long as Burrow's healthy. I think they clear the over. I really do. I think if he's healthy, it all hinges on him because obviously if he's not healthy, there's no way they're not getting half
No,
that.
no.
Um, so we'll go on to the NFC North. So you'll start with the teams, but real quick, the NFC North, of course, had Detroit, who went to the conference championship game and lost to your 49ers, their first conference championship game in what, I don't know, 30 years or something like that, whatever it was.
Since
Their
'91, I believe.
their schedule is, of course, they play all the teams in their own division twice. They play the NFC West and the AFC South. And then they play the equal um, division winner in the AFC of I have to check on that one. Who the other team that they play is. But that's their schedule. So Detroit strength of schedule, they're 11th
Mhm.
at 509, so right in the middle. Their over under is the highest in the division. This is one division where all 4 teams have different over unders. Their over under is 10.5. So go ahead.
So going into the season, they're going into every NFL season. There's always one, usually 2 teams, usually one NFC team, one AFC team that has a large amount of hype going into the season. And a lot of it's predicated off of how they ended the last season, how they looked, and they ultimately disappoint. And I pinpoint one of the teams in the NFC North as being one of those teams that people were going to pin as being the next team, and they ultimately failed to be that the next season. Maybe they don't continue to be that, but that next season they definitely hype. The Lions is not the team. The Lions scare me. The Lions have a good amount of talent, and it's young talent. I love the way Campbell has built that team. I love him. I love the coaching staff. And I don't know, maybe I love the coaching staff because a lot of them are guys that I grew up watching, you know. But I love his mentality. He's got a old school 70s, 80s, 90s football mentality. I like guys like I like Jack Campbell. I like the linebacker, right? I like Branch, the safety from Alabama. Trust me, I wish I didn't like these guys because they're going to be a big challenger for my boys. I really like Amon Brown. If you ever get a chance, he has a podcast. Watch it with him and his dad. His dad was I believe, a professional bodybuilder, and I think his mom was a German athlete herself. Right? I don't know if she performed in Olympics or whatever, but she was a big time athlete. And Amon Brown is him and his 2 brothers. They were all Division I wide receivers. I think 2 of them. 2 of them. Brown plays for the Lions, and his brother I think plays for the Bears
He used to. I don't
as
know
a
where he's at
receiver.
now.
He,
He's
yeah, I
played
don't know
on
where
the
he's at
Packers
now.
and the
He's what
Bears.
else play on the Packers, and then
Mhm.
the other one, I think he was a high level D1 receiver, but I don't know if he made it to the NFL. But the podcast with the father, and he's talking about he was very meticulous in thought of how he raised them and everything. It's really interesting. But I love him. He reminds me of Steve Smith.
Yeah.
And that's like, to me, that's a huge compliment. If I say somebody reminds me of Steve Smith, I'll tell you who when Debo first came in the league, I felt like he reminded me of Steve Smith. But
Too
Amon
big.
St. Brown is really well. I know. I mean, well, like a bigger version of him, right? But just runs and plays with an attitude. But I love him. Jamar Gibbs is, man, he's really scary. He's really scary because if he just gets a crease, he's
Mhm.
gone. He's gone. And then Jared Goff. Jared Goff is a really good quarterback. He's a really good quarterback. He's not he I wouldn't consider him to be great, but he's
Mhm.
really good. He's really good, and he's definitely good enough. He's proven he's good enough to get to a Super Bowl. I think he's good enough to win a Super Bowl. But
Mhm.
that they have so much talent up and down that roster, and a lot of it is scary because most of their talent isn't older than 26 years old. So they might be something to deal with for a while. I picked them. Unfortunately, I picked them for the over. The interesting thing about them is I can't think of anybody who I think can win an award on their team, even though I know how much talent they have. I can't identify like one guy who I'd say, oh, this guy will be the MVP or this, because even if they have, which they're not going to have, they will be over, but they're not going to have like 13, 14 wins. But even if they did, Jared Goff wouldn't be the MVP because we don't look
Mhm.
at him like that. He wouldn't, it would be, the thought process would be it's more of a team effort than anything, right? And then looking at, give me a second, I had their schedule up because I had a specific game identified. Um, but for them, I think the game of so I know most people think that I would say that
Week
it's
17.
yeah, week 17 against the 49ers, but I think a lot of things are going to be wrapped up by that time. So I think that game will lose a lot of its luster because a lot of things will be kind of you know
Remember though, there's only one bye.
yeah. I mean, I tend to I when you get that late in the season, unless it's a team that's you know a little bit above average. I don't know if the game still has an impact. I look at actually look at week 15 against the Bills, and I think that's going to be a good game because we know I'm a huge Josh Allen fan, and I think well we won't talk about the Bills because that would be for another episode, but I think that game against the Bills I would pick that as game one. The 49er line game, that's just too obvious. That's just too obvious. So I'm going to go with the Lions and Bills game.
Okay. Yeah, so I went over as well. I went 11-6. Look, they're going to start probably 4-0 and
Yeah, yeah,
probably 6-1, maybe even 7-0. It's hard to say the teams can start 7-0 because you just have one bad day. You know what I mean?
hmm
But
hmm
they'll be favored in 6 of their first 7 games at least. Uh, they start off with 3 or 4 at home. They against the Rams, against Tampa, at Arizona. We've already talked about Arizona, how both of us feel about them,
yeah,
and then verse at home against Seattle. So they pretty much get the NFC West out of the way until the 49ers at the end of the year, which I thought was kind of interesting. But um, they should win all 4 of those games, in my opinion. Their 3 are at home. I don't see Detroit really losing home games. Um, and then the one road games against an Arizona team that's subpar. And then after that, then they do go to Dallas. That should be a good game. We'll see. Dallas we kind of don't know with Dallas this year. Um, when we'll get to Dallas in another episode, and then at Minnesota, and then at home against Tennessee. So I I don't see how they don't hit the over because they haven't even played any division games. So even if you assume they go 3-3 in their division, which I think they'll do better than that. Let's say they go 500 in their division, they go 6-1 there. That's already 9-4. To hit the over, they just have to go 2-4 in the other 6 games, or 2-2 in the other 4 games. So I think it's pretty clear they're going to go over, barring any injury. Um, Primarily to Goff, I think. Actually, believe it or not, even though you're like he's not the MVP, and I agree, I don't think he would win it, but he's the one guy I don't think they can play without. I think the other guys, they can get by games without them, 1 or 2 games without them. But if Goff is gone, I don't think they have much of a chance to win unless they're playing one of those really bad teams. The games to watch, I had 2. I had Week 5 at Dallas,
Mm.
because of what happened last year, if you remember
Mm-hmm.
when they played, um, and they kind of got and it hurt them in the seeding. Remember, because of that, it threw off the playoff seeding. So I think Detroit's going to win that game.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a fun game to watch, and both teams are going to look at it a little different because of what happened last year. And then I still do have Week 17 at San Francisco because I think these are the 2 best teams from top to bottom in the NFC. And so that game could very well decide who plays at home in the NFC Championship game, and I think that's important. Detroit at home it's just different when you play at home, and then they're in a dome, and playing in a dome is different. The noise levels are affected and everything, and it's going to be a good game.
Yeah.
I disagree with you. I think it's not Week 18, where's the last game of the season. This is the last game because even if you already wrap something up, you sit guys Week 18. You don't sit in Week 17.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to be a good game. You also have potential. Brock Purdy could be in the MVP conversation. Christian McCaffrey could be on a record pace for something. So there's exciting things like that at this point of the year, and you're playing an elite team. That's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. And player to win the award, I actually went with Amon-Ra St. Brown as Offensive Player of the Year. I mean, you look at the numbers he put up as a receiver. He's putting up elite numbers, and every year he's gotten better and better. Now, to me, for a receiver to win it, more than likely to be Tyreek Hill because of his explosiveness, and he has some of those games where he has like 230 yards. It would be very difficult because there's a lot of receivers that are putting up crazy numbers, but I do think it's Amon-Ra St. Brown that would take it. It is the most
Yeah.
likely to do it because all the rookies are not really at positions that would take home awards. So,
Yeah. And look,
um,
I know the I know the Niner Lion game is the game. I'm trying to not make everything
nah,
49ers,
man.
man.
But
I
look,
say
at the end
soon,
at the end of the
soon our
day.
listeners are going to be like, this guy can't stop talking about the
Nah,
49ers.
man. Well, look, most of the games are going to involve San Francisco or Kansas City because those were the teams
Yeah.
that won the Super Bowl. So went to the Super Bowl. So you got to go through
Yeah.
them in your conference to get there. So it's going to
Yeah.
happen. So the next team who finished second last year, and I think this is who you were alluding to earlier, is Green Bay.
Mm-hmm.
Their strength of
Yeah.
schedule is tied for
Mm-hmm.
4th at 526. Their over under is right underneath Detroit at 9.5.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I'm going under, and I think they're going to start the season 3-4. I think there's a good chance that they can start the season 0-2. And then we start seeing what's wrong with Jordan Love. Did they pay him too early, et cetera, et cetera. Look, I don't mind being wrong on this. I just be feeling that they're that team that I think Jordan Love is a really good quarterback. And I think long term, the Packers have a lot of good young pieces on their offense. They've got, some good pieces on their defense. I think that this season in this season in its own, I think they are going to be that everybody's expecting to. Because I mean, the last thing we have in our mind is just how good they played against Dallas. And then, a lot of people there is in a lot of people's mind, they should have beat the 49ers. Even though, hey, if was a fifth, we'd all be drunk. Uh, I think that they're going to win 8, maybe 9 games, which if they win 9 games is obviously a disappointment. Um, I think they're going to just miss the playoffs. And again, it does not an indication of what they're going to be moving forward. But I just say this next season, I truly believe that they are that surprise team where we look and say, what happened? If obviously, if I'm absolutely wrong and the offense is more explosive than I think it's going to be this year, and the defense is stout and all that good stuff, then Jordan Love has opportunity to be MVP. And I would say, and if that's the case, LaFleur
Coach of
has
the
the
year.
potential to be
Mm-hmm.
coach of the year. And the game of the year for them I had as Week 17 versus the Texans. That's going to be the battle of the young quarterbacks.
Week 7, not 17.
I meant, did I say 17? I meant 7. I
Yeah.
meant 7.
Yeah.
Good Lord. Yeah, in my head I said 7. But anyways, Week 7, and especially because I think by that season, it's going to be a lot of what's wrong with the Packers, and if they lose that game, I could definitely then see the season really just being up and down from there, and they will fulfill the prophecy at that point then of what I've said about them hitting the under, which I think is the case because I do think that Texans team is going to be good, but I think they're going to start out 0-2. I don't see them beating the Eagles. I think the Colts it's early enough in the season.
And real quick though, the Eagles
Yeah.
game, and this is interesting. It's in Brazil
Mhm.
on a Friday.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I'm just throwing that out there.
And I could see early in this. I think early in the season. I don't want to step on this too much, but I think early in the season, regardless of how their overall season goes, I could see the Colts catching people early in the season because I think that Anthony Richardson is just a freak. He's a physical freak, and I think early in the season, I think he and that team is going to surprise people. Again, I don't know how that's going to carry out the rest of the season, and we'll talk about that team another day. But yeah, I could see them getting off to an 0-2 start. And I could potentially see them getting off to a 3-4 start. But if I'm wrong, Jordan Love could be in the MVP race.
Yeah. Yeah. So I also have them as under. I have them finishing about 8 and 9.
Okay.
They do the one, and this is where it's tricky because some of the tougher games they have are home games. So that does help a little bit, right? For instance, to your point, you alluded to Philadelphia. That's a neutral site game in Brazil. That's a weird. Indianapolis is at home, and they do have the extra 2 days to prepare and rest, which they'll probably need for Anthony Richardson. They get Houston at home. They get the 49ers at home. They get Miami at home. And the Miami game's in December, and we've seen Tua Tagovailoa play in the cold weather, which
Good
is,
effort.
Yeah. So if it's snowing, I think you got to go with Green Bay in that game. But yeah, I mean, I have them going, and it's really, to your point, it's not anything against them. Look, they have a very difficult schedule, the 4th hardest schedule in the league. And they don't have offensive weapons. I mean, these guys they're good. They're NFL players. But they don't have they got a better running back now than they did a year ago. I think Jacobs is better.
Yeah.
But their receivers are still nothing to look. At some point, you
I
got to
actually
draft a receiver, man.
I actually like the talent long term. Maybe not necessarily
Yes,
the next
but
season,
I think
but I like Christian Watson.
you need a go-to wide receiver. You don't have that. You need a guy that he can go to when everyone's covered and you can throw to try and fit the ball in a tight window to make a play. For me, the game to go get one. You had one. Week 9, Detroit. Home game against Detroit, to me, is the big one because they could conceivably be as good as 6-2. I don't think they will be. Or more realistically, along the lines of about 4-4 with that game, where that game is a turning point because it's home against Detroit. And obviously Green Bay is picked as, and I do think they are the second best team in this division right now because we just don't know enough about Caleb Williams yet. We have to wait and see how he plays. It's hard with the rookie quarterback. Because then after the bye, they do get at Chicago, and then they have San Francisco, Miami, and then at Detroit after that. I mean, that's 3 tough games right there. So I think that's a huge game. They have to win. It's in the middle of the season. And it could be a turning point in terms of, are we going to be playoff contenders or is the season pretty much headed towards over? And player to win the award, I actually picked my boy Javon Bullard, safety.
Mm-hmm.
He's got the starting position there, and he's a big play guy. He was the defensive player of the year in it was the Peach Bowl, the semifinal against Ohio State. He had the hit on Marvin Harrison, which everyone was like, it's illegal. It's illegal. No, it wasn't. It was not targeting. Watch it again.
Mm-hmm.
Watch in
No.
slow motion. It was a clean hit, jarred the ball loose. Unfortunately, Harrison did get hurt. That did help Georgia a lot because ain't nobody guarding that guy anyway. I don't care what team you're on. And then in the national championship game, he had like an interception, two interceptions, and a fumble recovery in that monster blowout against TCU, 63-7. So he steps up big in big games. He his whole career at Georgia, while he was there, he forced turnovers, and those kind of guys win Defensive Player of the Year award. And again, with a draft that wasn't real high on defensive pass rushers, where there was like a guy that's like, dude, this guy coming out is it. A guy in the secondary that can force some turnovers, it has a good chance of winning that. So I went with Bullard as a little bit out of the box thinking on that one.
No, that was a good one. That was a good one.
So the next team we're gonna go to a couple teams with some young quarterbacks, more than likely. Minnesota strength of schedule is tied for 16th at 502. Their over under is at 7.5. What was at 7.5? I think it's dropped since then, but it's 7.5, which was actually the lowest in the division. Go ahead.
If you know what's funny is when they
7.5, man. So 8 and 9 did the over.
Yeah, no, they're gonna. It's if I had more confidence in JJ McCarthy, I'd say over, but from everything that they're saying, I when they first drafted him, I said, okay, I think he's going to end up being Rookie of the Year, but I think he's going to have a rough first year. They may not even. It may even be a situation where he doesn't start more than 10 games, and Sam Darnold, he's not it. He's not it. Yeah, he's not it. So I think it's going to be a rough season for them. I could see them over under is 7.5, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so 7 games they're under, right? Obviously they have who I think we probably both would say is, if not the best receiver, is probably the second best receiver in the league. I think he's the best receiver. I think Tyreek Hill is the most explosive playmaker. That may not make a lot of sense to people, but I think that's a good kind of description.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
But no team has ever, had a receiver say, everybody hop on my back and we're gonna we're gonna get this thing done. It doesn't work like that. So I have them down for 7 wins. It's hard to say, for them because I just don't see them having a really good chance of exceeding that expectation. So it was hard to be the game of the year for them from a winning standpoint. So I guess it would be more of a just, entertainment standpoint. I'd say by week 15, I think we would probably agree that JJ McCarthy will be in. So they play against the Bears. So, hey, you get to see 2 rookie quarterbacks duel it out. That's always fun. So that would be my game to watch for them. And again, it's not from a winning standpoint. It's more of from a future standpoint. And if by some chance they prove me absolutely wrong, then I'd say JJ McCarthy has a great chance of being Rookie of the Year. If they happen to win, 10 games, 11 games, something along those lines. But I don't really see it happening.
Yeah, I went under. I have them going about 5-12. Look, they could potentially win week 1. They're at the Giants. Even with Sam Darnold,
I think they're going to be
potentially win
bad,
that game.
but yeah.
The Giants, I don't think, are going to be very good at all.
No.
You got at the Giants, and they're home against the 49ers. That's a loss. Home against Houston. That's a loss. At Green Bay, I think that's a loss. Home
Yeah.
against the Jets. That's a loss. And home against Detroit. That's a loss. So, you're starting out 1-5 right off the bat, which does lead me to the game to watch. Their bye week is week 6,
Mm-hmm.
and then they play Detroit. So that's not really a good time for McCarthy to make his first start against a team like that. So I went with week 9 against the Colts.
Okay.
Colts have an okay defense. It's not
Yeah.
great. It's kind of in the middle. But it is after a Thursday game, so you do have a couple extra days to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to be J.J. McCarthy's first game. Minnesota is probably going to be 1-6, 2-5 at best. That gives him about half a season to start. Now, if they really feel like, which reports already are out, that he is not close, right? Which I was saying that before the draft. I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
would not draft this kid. I don't think he's ready. But he can make improvements, and hopefully he does. If they feel like he's good enough at that
Mm-hmm.
point, say, hey, let's see what he's got. They can't. Now, again, they have an advantage because he's 21.
Yeah.
So if he doesn't play this year, next year he's only going to be 22.
Yeah.
So it really, you're fine. It's not like the Broncos. We had this conversation. The Broncos, but Bo Nix is 24. He's going to be 25 in January. If he ain't ready now, he's never going to be ready. He's 24 years old, right? So yes, he needs to learn the playbook, all that kind of stuff. Give him some time to acclimate to NFL. But by the middle of the season, he should be fine and acclimated to that part of it. And if he's not ready to go, he's never going to be. J.J. McCarthy's different. Player to win an award. Justin Jefferson's their best player. I agree with you. But he's not winning Offensive Player of the Year on this team. I do think even if Darnold plays, though, they're putting up points and he can put up yards.
Mm-hmm.
But for him to win it, he would have to break records. He would have to have like a 2,000-yard receiving season, 20 touchdowns or something like that, which he could
And
do.
they'd have to win. And they'd have
they're
to
good.
win.
If he put up that kind of numbers, they wouldn't even have to win. They'd give it to him because if he's breaking records, you're getting the award. And the thing is, they're going to be throwing the ball because they're going to be behind. So he's going to get numbers. But are his numbers going to be so much better than everybody else's to win? I don't know. So I also looked at Dallas Turner's Defensive Rookie of the Year. I loved that pick. Would I have traded all they traded to move up to get him? We'll see. If he turns out to be as good as they think he is, then yeah, because I think they could have picked him where they picked J.J. McCarthy, and it would have been a good pick. But I'll pick Dallas Turner, and they did. And I cannot remember the guy's name right now. He was on Houston last year. They signed him. They let Daniil Hunter go, and they signed him. And I'm blanking on his name right now. So there's other good pass rushers on the team who may get some one-on-one. So he might have some good numbers. So for defense rookie of the year, I'd go with Dallas Turner.
That's a good one.
And then the last team, NFC North, and the number 1 pick, courtesy of Carolina, shooting themselves right now for making that trade. Chicago basically traded Bryce Young for DJ Moore and Caleb Williams. Tell me who won that trade. Wow. So anyway,
Don't
Chicago.
give up on Bryce Young yet, though.
I'm not giving up on him yet, but you got a legit number 1 receiver, and you got everyone agreed Caleb Williams was a better quarterback than Bryce Young.
Yes.
So
yes.
We'll see NFL, right? But anyway, strength schedule tied for 29th, one of the worst. Actually, I think the very bottom, 467 strength of schedule. Their over-unders 8.5. Yeah, 8.5. So go ahead.
This was a hard one because I do think people get caught up in the nail painting and all this other stuff, or people seeing him cry with his mom because they lost a game at USC. Caleb Williams is a baller. He is an absolute baller. Forget all the outside stuff. He is a goon. Watching him play at Oklahoma and at SC, he's going to be special. I would be, if I were buying stock in a player, I would definitely buy stock in him, and I'd be shocked if he doesn't turn out to be what most people are projecting him out to be. But even with that being said, it's really difficult to win in your first season, and it's even when you have the weapons, it's difficult to really project how everybody's going to fit together. But I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over, and I'm going to say 9 wins. I think obviously the obvious for them is Rookie of the Year. Caleb Williams can win Rookie of the Year. That's pretty obvious, I believe. Um, and again, I mean, even if they win 9 games under that projection, they're not going to be a playoff team. So for me,
It
the
depends on
best,
tiebreakers, man. There's 7 teams make it. So depending on
yeah,
tiebreakers, they
yeah,
could potentially squeeze in.
it's 7 teams now. They could squeeze in, but I just look at their schedule in the game for me because I look at it from an entertainment standpoint. Week two, week two, like they're playing the Texans. I think everybody would want to see. Again, we know that when we say it's QB versus QB, we understand it's not really QB versus QB. It's the defense, but nonetheless, I think everybody's going to be excited to see what Caleb Williams, who we're all projecting to be the best quarterback of this class, does against the guy who showed himself to be the best quarterback of last year's class. Um, that's going to be a big game, and it could be something that is the beginning of a performance of two guys who could end up being rivals for the next 5 to 10 years. We don't know, but we're going to get our first kind of our first peek at it in week 2 of this season. So I have that as the game to watch. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went over as well, and I
Hmm.
went 9-8. Their schedule's easy. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean as easy as you can get.
Yeah.
Um, they to me they are this year's version of the Texans from last year, and what I mean by
Hmm.
that is now we'll have to see about coaching. Okay,
That's the
see
thing.
about
Yeah.
coaching,
Yeah.
but in terms of the executives and what they did in terms of helping the team, they made a
Hmm.
lot of changes. Look, as a rookie quarterback, I don't think you get asked to be put in a better spot. You have DJ
No.
Moore, who's a legit number one. You have Keenan Allen, who
Hmm.
is probably as close to a Hall of Fame wide receiver as you can get without being one.
Yeah.
Because I don't think
Paula,
he's a
very
Hall
good.
of Famer, but
Hmm.
he is consistent. He has hands. He's talk about an excellent route runner.
Hmm.
And then you also drafted him a running mate in Romeo Dunze,
Hmm.
who is going to he's going to be in the slot. Probably Keenan Allen probably running the slot. I don't care who you got a mismatch somewhere. And Cole Kmet's no slouch at tight end. And then they signed
Really
DeAndre
good.
Swift at running back,
DeAndre Swift, who is one of my
which
favorite
who's
running backs. Yeah.
a good running back and also a very good receiver out of the backfield.
Yes.
Caleb Williams is in a situation to be successful. They also added some stuff on some pieces on defense, and the defense wasn't absolutely awful last year anyway. Um, so I do think the Bears are trending in the right direction.
Hmm.
Their strength of schedule also allows them to get some wins. Now, game to watch, I went a similar route as you. I just went the opposite year. I went week 8 at Washington, the top 2 picks in the draft. Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams won the starting job as soon as they were drafted. It was handed to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
This will be either their 7th or 8th game. I have to look and see when their buys were. But this is the
Hmm.
seventh. It will be the 7th or 8th game for each of them. So they'll be halfway through a season. We'll kind of have an idea of how they're doing. They'll have found their footing by that point. I think Chicago's overall a better team than Washington, but it'll be entertaining. They're both entertaining quarterbacks. They're both very mobile, very agile. Jaden Daniels, thank God he's a good runner because that line is not great. But that's going to be an interesting game. Not to mention for Chicago, that could actually be the game if they were to win that catapults them to a playoff position because their 2 games after that are at Arizona. We've already discussed how we feel about them
Yeah.
and home against New England. So that could be the start of a 3-game winning streak in the middle of the season that can put them in position to where they're fighting for a playoff spot. Um, The other game, and it kind of just depends on obviously how the whole season goes, is week 18 at Green Bay. Could be one of those games that's flexed because that could be a game where both the teams are 8-8 and the winner makes the
Yeah.
playoffs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or a win or go home, or like that one year was Detroit and Green Bay. And if Green Bay won, they were in. Detroit had nothing to play for. Dan Campbell's first year, man, and Detroit win. They beat them.
Mm-hmm.
Remember?
Mm-hmm.
It could be something like that where it's an entertaining game because it's your rival. You want to spoil your rival. So,
Oh yeah.
and then obviously for player to win the award, I mean, it's Caleb Williams, offensive rookie of the year.
Yeah.
He is the front runner to win it. I think it will be him or Jaden Daniels. It usually is quarterbacks,
Mm-hmm.
and both of those guys are going to start more. J.J. McCarthy, Drake May, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix are not going to play enough to win it. So
And
it's going to be between
wide
Caleb.
receivers have bad quarterbacking.
Yeah, and then for Romeo Dunze, he's playing with the quarterback, so he really is at a
Yes. Yeah.
disadvantage. And the wide receiver would have to put up, there would have to be no quarterback that's having a great year, on top of the receiver having a very good year to win it. So,
Yeah.
all right, well, that does it for our AFC NFC North. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it. We'll be back next time with the South divisions, the over-unders, discussing those teams for the NFL. Week 1 preseason underway. Almost there, baby. Less than I think just a little over a month before real NFL games start. So thank y'all for tuning in. We appreciate it. Have a good one.